Like yesterday, we have again today a chant related to learning. This is again a very ancient chant, and perhaps most of you have heard it before. We'll once more invite you to join us in this chant. Thank you. Thank you. Om Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. We'll now give you a brief translation. Asato ma sadgamaya. Let this process of learning take us from ignorance to great knowledge, and a knowledge of the truth, not just knowledge for knowledge's sake, but a knowledge of the truth. Tamaso ma Jyotirgamaya. As we walk this path of learning, let us move from darkness to light, very definitively to light. Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Let our learning take us from the fear of death to the knowledge of the eternal and the bliss that comes from that knowledge. We'll request you to join in the last bit. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Namaskar. Thank you.
It is my privilege this morning to introduce Dr. Mrityananja Antriya. He is part of the Indian management movement and a founder chairman of Sampradhan, the Indian Center for Philanthropy, which strives to create a caring, sharing, compassionate attitude among people from business management areas or business areas and encourage them in a spirit of giving selflessly to the communities where they are situated. Yesterday we focused on the aspect of the child's learning, the child's development. Today we look then at the adult, the educator, who must enable this learning to happen. And we start with Dr. Adhya, who will then lead us through Indian philosophy and how this links in with our Montessori approach. Thank you. Please.
Right. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, teachers, students, my young friends from all over the world. The Sanskrit word to describe my feelings at this point of time, you may be familiar, and perhaps that can figure in some future invocation. The word is Ananda. There is no direct English equivalent to that word. It is not just pleasure, it is not happiness. It is a kind of a transcendental, spiritual kind of feeling of being transported from the physical body and the normal constraints of urban living under stress and tension to a feeling that this is the real truth, this kind of global community coming together. On behalf of all of you and myself, may I once more, I am sure this has happened before, pay tribute to the 26th Montessori Congress Committee here in Chennai, led by Leela Sampson and various committee members, all the dedicated volunteers that has made this possible. I just heard briefly after my introduction from the president of the International Montessori Congress that this is perhaps one of the best congresses and is a kind of a standard and benchmark that future congresses have to come to live up to. I am delighted. On your behalf, let me thank you. I think in the West, conferences are planned well in time, not so well in the emerging countries like India. And this is one of the very few where I got the invitation to speak here about a year and a half ago, 18 months ago. That's very well planned, exceeding well planned. The hazard in such a situation is that you tend to forget your commitment because many other things come in between, but one has to keep track. The topic that I'm not a teacher, although my father was. He was headmaster of a high school in the 1940s. At that time, Montessori was even more immediate and prominent, having been here in Kalakshetra, and there was a ferment of renaissance in India just before political independence from the British. But I have been keenly interested in participative, interactive, empowering methods of teaching. In fact, even the word teaching, we've been replacing with the word learning. Even in the corporate sector, we are persuading organizations to change the name from a training program to a learning program, and a trainer to a facilitator, a resource person. These are things that we are familiar with. So I'm speaking from that perspective. I happened to choose the field of management because in the 60s and 70s, there was a vacuum. It was very relevant for India for industrial development. But my basic interest is in philosophy, heritage, humanity as a whole. So I'd like to be counted among the small number of emerging global citizens. Nationality is a historical accident. The topic that I suggested in discussion with Leela ji was this topic about some universal concepts from Indian philosophy. As you know, India has been open to all religions of all kinds, including a small Jewish community that figured in the 26/11 bombings in Mumbai. Therefore, the very fact of this openness means that India has been influenced in various ways, and some of the core concepts that I mentioned are not divisively, fiercely, locally Indian. They are universal, and I keep in mind those concepts which are relevant to contemporary education. Do we normally have a question time as well? Even with such a large audience, it is possible. Do we have hand mics that move around? No, later on, or if necessary. If so, I will try and plan to leave about 15-20 minutes at the end for questions, if you'd like to, otherwise at the tea break as well. For those of you, in case you need to get in touch with me, just the email ID there. As a environmental aware global citizen, I have stopped printing my visiting card. I now share only email ID with people. Okay, I have divided this presentation into just 5 parts. Initially, begin by noting what are the challenges of education today? There are always challenges. In the current global context, there are some unique challenges, and they're getting actually more difficult. And as a layman, and several of you here are Montessori students, practitioners, and experts, my selection of some Montessori concepts that are particularly relevant in the contemporary world as well, and then juxtapose those with some Indian philosophy concepts. Here again, it is a huge ocean. One can do a bit of a sampling, and I'm just picking a few here, and each one of them can be drilled down into more detail. And perhaps among the audience, including our overseas guests, I'm always surprised. One of the things that you learn at some point of time and gives you some humility is that in every audience, even if you are introduced as the expert in the subject, there is at least one person who knows a bit more than you do. I'm sure there are here Sanskrit scholars, students of Indology who have studied these things, and I am open to correction. Then I look at some applications of these concepts of Montessori as well as Indian philosophy, and being a student of management as well as the Bhagavad Gita, the Gita, perhaps the single most important Hindu scripture, the one core idea there is a life of action. The philosophy is one of karma. You can never avoid karma. Therefore, it is just as well that you perform the best possible karma. So I'd like to conclude with some action suggestions. After being a professor, I am now working as a consultant. That gives you the luxury of advising without total executive responsibility. So I'd like to conclude with some suggestions as well. Now, challenges of education. I think perhaps the single most important challenge is peace between religions. The recent death at age 81 of Samuel Huntington of Harvard, just the obituaries again once more have reminded us that the clash of civilizations was his thesis, and in a way he was prescient. With the end of the Second World War, fortunately there has been a learning in Europe, and traditional enemies like France and Germany are now part of a growing European Union, 27 countries going to 35, 500 million. With the end of the Cold War between the US and the former Soviet Union, we thought that the major military conflicts of a global level perhaps are a thing of the past. There will always be regional tensions and so on, like the one right now going on in Gaza, which even within Israel the opinion is divided. So since military wars have become too costly and dangerous with nuclear warfare, the field has shifted to religious identities, and in some cases sadly exclusive identities, not inclusive, and therefore establishing peace between religions is one of our major challenges. Instead of land, economic growth and jobs, religion may become another rationalization for war. The second major challenge that has arisen is, of course, the increasing awareness of climate change, global warming, the threat to our ecology, and the fact that the chairman of the Intergovernmental Panel, which got the Peace Nobel Prize last year, Dr. R.K. Pachauri, happens to be an Indian, and the whole committee, of course, shares the prize, has increased the awareness here, fortunately, among 1 billion people in India and China. So this ecology is a major challenge for us. I have been concerned for quite some years that one of the effects of capitalist development, and especially when that capitalism becomes a global market with opportunities for imports, exports, economic growth, the materialist path leads people not deliberately but unconsciously by negligence to allow classical heritage to gradually wither away for want of interest and support. Wherever I speak among Indian, or I address several youth audiences in colleges and universities, I ask them one question, and I'd like to address this to our young Indian friends here, girls particularly, and boys. Women have been better guardians of heritage than men. How many classical dance forms there are in India? And I don't get an answer. Some people try 3, 4. There are 7, and if you include Satriya from Assam, it is now 8. And then I ask them to list what are these 7. Similarly, what are the various music traditions, classical music traditions? We have Hindustani classical in the north, Carnatic classical in the south. Within those, there are different gharanas or schools, great gurus. For example, many may not know that day before yesterday was the kickoff of the centenary year of one of our great vocalists of South India and the composer Balasubramaniam, G.N. Balasubramaniam. And this will go on during the whole year. It's a terrific opportunity. The fourth concern that education should have is the need for total quality of life. Now, many years ago, Herbert Marcuse wrote that book, One Dimensional Man. Although revolution and dictatorship of proletariat is not the answer, the one dimensionality is still an issue. The preoccupation with jobs, career, money, wealth, possessions. So people are looking at material quality of life, not even physical quality of life in terms of physical fitness and health. In fact, some of the material prosperity is injurious to health. The WHO recognizes obesity as one of the 4 major rising health threats of the 21st century. So I'd like to talk about the need for total quality of life. That is including several dimensions: physical, mental, that is emotional, intellectual, continuous learning. Most often learning stops with the university degree, which is more a passport to get a job, and thereafter it is incidental. But one of the values of the Indian civilization is the stress on jignasa, the thirst for knowledge continuously throughout life and moving forward. The aesthetic quality of life, so beyond the physical, mental, intellectual, the ability to appreciate art, culture, not necessarily in sophisticated forms. One doesn't have to be a scholar of Picasso and the cubic art form, but even the ability to appreciate this kind of campus, the greenery, flowers, seasons, the sky, the full moon which is coming up on the 11th next Monday, just the awareness of the environment, and of course, in addition, the ability to enjoy music, dance, various other lovely creations of humanity. And finally, a spiritual quality of life. Beyond all these, certain kind of ethics, values, sense of unity with other human beings, with other life forms. And finally, one of the concepts, the ultimate concept in Indian philosophy for a human being is to become a dhyani, a meditator of a special kind, Brahmadhyani, a person who is constantly living at 2 levels, at the superficial level dealing with the phenomenal world, people, interactions, tasks, responsibilities, but always at a deeper level, and the person can anytime get in touch with it, aware of the cosmos, in touch with the cosmos. Not just this earth, this solar system, it's a tiny speck in the Milky Way, and there are stellar constellations, and the way astronomers and scientists are now developing powerful telescopes and space-bound, they are only seeing more and more how much bigger this universe is, where we are a very small speck, and there's no reason for conflicts, tension, unpleasantness, and so on. We can therefore live with a great deal more of charity. The second set of points I'd like to take up, or my understanding of some Montessori concept, her stress on helping the child, each child, to discover its individuality, how the authority of the teacher, the classroom, the school, the parents at home are all inclined to stifle this individuality, trying to mold them into a common syllabus, examinations, certain kinds of discipline. While some structure is necessary, it is more important that it be an enabling, facilitating structure than a constraining structure. And the uniqueness of each child, the distinctive capabilities, each one being different. And our job in education is to help the child find that individuality. That individuality also has great implications later in life, the ability to think, to dissent, to differ. Montessori's intuitive insight was that Goebbelsian propaganda, Mussolini's propaganda in Italy, and support by the elite and even the parents and the community seniors making all people think in one direction, patriotism, my country, right or wrong. This, to some extent, will be questioned, as we have seen those Amartya Sen's, the Nobel laureate's thesis has been vindicated again and again, that democracies are more likely to avoid war, avoid famine, avoid excessive suffering. Therefore, there is more dissent, discussion, argument. That will come if there is individuality. Now, in large organizations, there is a tendency towards bureaucracy, being compliant with the authority structure, but they realize that it is necessary to create space for discussion and debate. The second point that Montessori emphasized, which struck me as very important in the current world, the education of adults for a moral order. We've been talking about various things in the last 30, 40 years, the new world economic order, the new world political order, restructuring the United Nations Security Council, so on. These have their place, they are important. But I think Montessori was in the line of great thinkers like Immanuel Kant, Tolstoy, Mahatma Gandhi here, thinking of a moral order as the most important one, within which you can have political, economic, and other kinds of religious orders as well. But at the top of it all, the world needs an order which is driven by some universally agreed principles which will ensure the survival of humanity. As well as now sharing prosperity, more inclusive growth. At national level, we are talking about inclusive growth. Some regional associations like ASEAN, EU talk about and do something in terms of sharing the prosperity of the rich members through a budget mechanism for the poorer. Eventually, this has to become a global process where we will be able to look back with pride that in our generation we wiped out poverty, high levels of child mortality, early mental damage due to malnutrition, micronutrition, various issues that UNICEF, WHO, Micronutrient International in Canada, they are bringing out. The third issue that Montessori stressed a great deal is education should be for peace. Peace is not brought about by politics. In fact, politicians may have a vested interest in tension, in the threat of war, action, and playing up the possibility of attack. So education has the much bigger role in preparing people for peace and questioning initiatives for militarism, high defense budgets, and to move towards a more borderless kind of world. She also made another beautiful point that much of education trains people to possess. And we see this now. Global capitalism only increases that. We have no other choice. I'm not running down that system. Some kind of a market economy is more consistent with democracy. It does give more consumer choice, but it also puts enormous responsibility on the consumer to be a mature person, to make the right choices. There is so much of advertising, brainwashing, subliminal messages that come on TV, press, and so on. So each individual has to be educated to love people, to love each other, love especially those who are disadvantaged, rather than to go on possessing, because for possession there is no upper limit. As economists recognize, wants are endless, and Gandhi's famous statement was recalled in the 1972 Stockholm Conference on the Environment, and thereon since then Rio, Brazil 1992, and so on, that there is enough in the world for every person's need, but there will never be enough for everyone's greed. So the idea of education should be to make people aware of their basic needs and keep the needs as little as possible. And this is the philosophy of some of the more recent gurus as well. The tradition of gurus is useful. Each may have his or her idiosyncrasies, but the parampara, the tradition of gurus, is that the same basic truths or rediscovered, re-articulated, and we are reminded of those gurus like Mahesh Yogi, Krishnamurti, J. Krishnamurti, and more recently Ravi Shankar and the others are only pointing this out, that the mind and then the soul cannot be free unless one reduces one's possessions and needs. The fifth concept from Montessori that struck a chord with me in line with Indian philosophy is her stress on the need to move towards a single human family. In 1930s, this was a very progressive thought. The European scene was seeing the consequences of the Versailles Treaty, some of the feelings in Germany about that treaty, the rise of unemployment, the US depression, 1929 to 1933. People are now worrying about a depression 2 possibility in the world. And at that time, people were retreating into not only a continental family, a country family, within that a racial family, and putting up imaginary enemies from other races. So at that time, she had the courage to talk about a single human family. Her reward was exile. She took it and continued to work hard in various ways. But these are some of the core values we need to keep in mind. Let me then look at some Indian philosophy concepts. I already referred to the concept of Brahmadhyani. Brahman is a non-religious, secular, philosophical name for the concept of God. It is not bound with any idol of Shiva, Krishna, Rama, and so on, or any particular God whose son was Jesus and recognize only that, or only Allah and no other God. Brahman includes all of them. And the core concept is that that universal force, life-creating force of the universe, is immanent in all living forms. Immanent not only in all human beings, immanent also in all other life forms, animals, birds. That's why you will find in Hindu mythology that divine attributes are assigned to monkeys, eagles, crocodiles, elephants, various forms, and every god has a vahana or a vehicle on which he or she moves. This is a way of making people aware. So there is this Paramatman, cosmic soul, and we are all Jivatmans, living souls. But the death is not the end of it. We can learn much from each other and from the animal world in terms of child rearing, family support, community cooperation, the kind of work Jane Goodall in Africa and Maneka Gandhi in India have been pioneering. But due to traditional education and the conditioning, some of the baser animal instincts are present in us, but the finer ones, where they also allow for their children, their community, cooperate together, we need to cultivate the more human, from the subhuman to the human, and then move beyond the human to the divine qualities. These are brought out in 3 gunas. The morning invocation referred to one of them, in two of them, Tamaso ma Sadgamaya. The majority of human beings, until made aware, either by internal introspection, meditation, or by an external force, either helpful force or a challenging threat, human beings tend to live primarily in a state of tamas. Tamas is inaction, indolence, laziness. So things like procrastination, not doing it now, doing it later, forgetting to do things, forgetting to make apologies, make amends, rebuilding relationships, constantly postponing. This is the predominant weight of human beings. When they come out of it, they come into the second level of psychological propensity that is rajas. From a tamasic person, the human being becomes a rajasic person. That is precisely what is happening worldwide to billions of us, and that is the effect of the market. Jobs, salaries, bonuses, fashion, things to purchase. Many newspapers and magazines now produce a special weekend glossy, how to spend it, for example, is the name of Financial Times weekend magazine. We have those in India also now coming up, giving you the most expensive motor cars, motorbikes, televisions, kitchen equipment, things that you don't need. You may use them for 3 days in a year. But the rajasic person will madly run after, and 20 years later regret that he neglected his wife, children, education, didn't spend time with older relatives who have passed away. So this is the cycle of rajas in which human beings live. But a few aware souls, and this is where education, educators, friends, community, gurus, satsang, coming together. For example, learning Bharatanatyam, classical dance together in a group of people, or going to a yoga or a meditation class. It's not only that as an individual you learn, but when you learn together, the community, the association of other good aspiring people. It does not mean that they are perfect, nobody is, but they're all aspiring in that direction. So with those kinds of forces, sattva guna, that is the third. So tamas, rajas and sattva, the sattva guna has to be brought out in people. It is very much in it there. For example, a very rich and highly successful actor is traumatized by the death of his second son out of fit recently. What is the use of money, fame, all those things to you when you experience that kind of a personal grief? John Travolta. So in Rajasic mind state, the person manifests anger, aggression, competition, conflict, violence, and so on. In the Sattvic state, the person can move on to refinement, which is visible externally as wisdom, balance. The Sattva is not weak, it is not namby-pamby, firm but fair, compassion, forgiveness. Many of these things are required. So under the concept of Brahmadhyani and Brahman, Indian philosophers divided education into two parts, Paravidya and Aparavidya. Education which is limited, which is Aparavidya, that is education of science, technology, physical sciences, social sciences, about the world around us, all that is very necessary. Montessori accepts that. She was herself a doctor. She was brought up in the scientific bent of mind. She knew that diseases could be diagnosed, medicines could be administered, and she gave the example of tuberculosis, and people for a long time were seeing this as an act of God, some punishment for past sins or plagues. People would die, and the community would helplessly accept it and move on, but you could deal with those. But there is a kind of education which is not subject to scientific methods of experimentation, verification, and so on. That is the Paravidya or transcendental education. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, I think, thoughtfully named his technique of meditation TM, transcendental meditation. It may be simple, 20 minutes. Some purists may feel that this is oversimplified. I often hear this, but I have a very clear mindset on this, that the world is now populated 6 billion plus and growing. We need quantity first, quality will follow. And if reaching more people meant that you temporarily simplify things, no harm done. When they pick up the simple, they will themselves automatically move to more complex. But we need not complicate things. So when he talked about transcendental meditation, it is education which incorporates values, ethics, spirituality, not religiosity. Religion is very much a personal, private affair. The Indian constitution is based on that premise that religion is a personal one. The state does not have any commitment to any religion. And interestingly enough, Jinnah was exactly on the same wavelength as Nehru when he set up Pakistan, and there is this famous speech he made in the Karachi Assembly in 1947, very similar to the Indian thinking, that Pakistan just happens to be a country where Muslims are in a majority, but you are free to go to your temples, churches, mosques and pray to any god of your choice. But sadly, the country has taken a different route. Even in Indonesia, Malaysia, there are now tendencies towards some fundamentalism. So we have to continue to fight this battle. And beyond spirituality, Sattva would now today mean universal personal responsibility. Every individual, independent of nationality, religion, race, economic class, education level, needs to think in terms of the world's problems, and to the extent of my capability, how far can I reach out and contribute to these problems. So we begin with the Brahman as the first principle here. Then we come to the second point about Loka Sangraha. Let me take on from this last point about universal responsibility. Indian philosophy also answers a question which people ask. Every young person, as psychologists know, has to deal with two major questions in adolescence. One is identity, who am I? And they make mistakes, they go around search, eventually they find that identity which is in tune with their capabilities, their strengths, and they go on to flower later in life. The second question they have to settle is the authority question, the ability to accept the reality that there will always be some authority above you, and the responsibility that you will have some responsibility over others. So how to accept that authority without being damaged, how to exercise the authority without being vindictive or cruel. They also, as part of that identity and authority, they ask this question: what should I do in life? And what should I not do? What should be the goals in life? The existential philosophy of Kierkegaard and Sartre dealt with this question, that people not finding an answer were in a state of anxiety. Persistent angst was the human condition according to them. Therefore they said that there is no essence before existence. You have to put essence by choosing life objectives. Some did, some didn't. There were many casualties. Also, there needs to be some set of values and norms in society which will guide young people to choose the right kind of goals consistent with community and social interest. When there is anomie, normlessness, one of the dangers is self-destruction. And the pioneering study in the 19th century was done by Emil Durkheim in Italy. He studied the rise of suicides with the growth of the Industrial Revolution. People feeling lack of some governing norms and values in life to guide them in their action. Indian philosophy gives a clear answer, unequivocal answer, that every human being has four goals in life: balanced, mutually consistent, but at the margin contradictory. Therefore, you have to make some trade-offs, mature, wise trade-offs, different trade-offs at different stages of life, a dynamic kind of equilibrium between these four goals. And these are well known to my Indian friends here. Purushartha. Purush does not mean man. It is like the German man kann, one can. Purush means person. Purushartha, four goals of the human being. And how did they state these? Even the very sequence, the order in which the four are stated is universal. No Indian ever, I think, even if you wake him up in his sleep, will mention them in any other order. Any Indian who knows these four will always state them only in this order. The first is dharma. The first of the four goals is dharma. Dharma means ethics. Live a righteous life. Whatever you do, do the right thing. The second is a very pragmatic, practical, real life goal: artha, wealth. The second goal is artha. So they were not otherworldly, they were not unrealistic, They didn't deny existence in this world. So the child should aspire to a reasonable amount of wealth. One or two conditions they put on that wealth by implication. Whatever artha or wealth you earn must be through dharmic means. Earn your money and wealth fairly by good means. For example, beyond the mortgage crisis in the US, mortgage followed by the banking, followed by the consumer credit card, now a fourth bomb has just hit them. Many of you being in this beautiful, peaceful surrounding may not have yet read about this in detail. Bernard Madoff, his $50 billion scam of duping many people of their investments, some very big people, princesses, rich businessmen in Europe and US, has hit them. Now, what will a man do with $50 billion? How much can you eat? How much can you wear? How much can you enjoy? This is a complete neurotic miscarriage. So they said, earn your wealth by proper means, earn enough, and use that wealth dharmically also. Worldwide, there is this concern about drug trafficking, trafficking of girls and women, and so on. And quite rightly, people are saying that rather than controlling the sex trade, control the consumers of the sex trade, the users of the sex trade. So how people use artha used to be governed by dharma. That is number two. Number three, they were also very realistic. They said the body has lots of drives. They must find legitimate channels of enjoyment, particularly food and sex, but also many other kinds of enjoyments that are possible in life. So they said, enjoy those kama, those desires, dharma aviruddha kaman, those desires which are not against dharma. So not against the dharma to your wife, to your children, to your organization, to your family memory, to the next generation which will be coming. So if you keep in mind the various stakeholders, past, present and future. For example, when we talk about environment and ecology, one of the major issues is taken from jurisprudence, equity. And equity is a profound concept. If there is no equity, there will be grievance, and there is potential for revolt, insurrection, war of various kinds. And if you bring equity into the era of ecology, environment, it is intergenerational equity. We are borrowing Mother Earth from our children and grandchildren, and we have already consumed, and we have violated this sense of equity. So they said that enjoy karma, which is not inequitable, which will not later cause you regret. For example, a very obvious and micro but very important element of that karma with dharma is that we have a dharma to the body. There is a sarira dharma. The body is a temple for the spirit, God, by whatever name the person wants to call it. Body is the temple of the human spirit, and it is our dharma not to abuse this body. Just because one has wealth, excessive drinking, calorie consumption, trans fats of various kinds, and obesity and various other lifestyle diseases that are coming. There is one hypothesis among the medical community that human lifespan, which has been increasing, may have peaked, and because of modern lifestyle diseases, it may start coming down again. Now, the government's help, some are very progressive. California has just recently passed this legislation banning trans fats from all restaurants and cafes. Now, governments can pass a legislation, but the individual has to overcome the personal predisposition and craving for many of these things. We have now a very aggressive health minister in India who is determined to ban smoking during his regime in power, which will end in May this year with the election, and he is moving very aggressively in that direction, and many people support him. The fourth and final objective goes beyond these three of dharma, artha and kama, and it is not an imposition, it is an invitation. It is the most beautiful invitation. It is the most alluring invitation to human beings, that is, leave all this behind. How much of this? Artha and Kama. You have enough of it, and what is in it? Moksha, transcendence, liberation as the final ultimate goal. The joy that you will find, that it is there in the fridge, but I will not eat it. It is available, but I will not buy it. Yeah? That holiday I can go, but I will not do it. Rather, I'll give a donation somewhere else which is deserving. So, today, in fact, people are coming more and more into the spiritual sphere, into the moksha. For example, advocates of exercise say that in exercise you get 3 benefits now. One is obvious, the physical benefit of exercise. The 3 usual mantras that are repeated in all our newspapers and magazines, cardiovascular, aerobic, and some weights for bone and muscle strength. Do all that, you get physical benefit. And then people say, quite rightly, if you do exercise regularly, you get a lot of emotional satisfaction. And this is the time of New Year resolutions and breaking them. We are close to the 10th day when we can break them. But if a person is able to keep up control of diet and exercise, now people are beginning to say, I think the priests worldwide are joining in on this for health reasons, that you also get a spiritual satisfaction, that I am keeping my body in good shape for it to do better things for humanity. So moksha is not for the end of life. My own counsel to politicians, civil servants, and corporate managers is that delegate more, develop people, give up your current authority and responsibility, find new things to do, liberate yourself from every role that you have after having performed it from some period of time very well. But people are afraid of their chairs, of their positions. They don't like people to grow below them. They find it a threat. They have various kinds of secrets which they don't divulge. The organization suffers, the society suffers. So moksha is something we should experience, the ability to keep giving up. And there are various rituals built into it. For example, today is the 11th day of the moon, Ekadashi, and in the Indian tradition, older people will fast. I now find that many young people are also doing this kind of fast, and they keep a Somvar Vrat, Monday or Tuesday, which is a kind of a body discipline, ability to give up a meal, one meal or one whole day. People make a resolve to go on a pilgrimage to some of our mountain temples, a place called Sabarimala in Kerala. 40 days early, young chaps start preparing for it, and they have various kinds of restrictions on their diet and their sleeping time and so on. It is not so much the ritual, but the effect it has on the will, the mind, the control over the body, the ability to make decisions, denial of indulgence. So with these 4 objectives, the individual can move forward, and I think Sigmund Freud and the psychoanalysts in Europe addressed this question. The Victorian era ethos was very much prudish. They found a lot of neurosis from the denial of the karma, particularly the sexual karma. They brought liberation, but it went too far towards AIDS. Now there is need for correction. Human beings swing on a pendulum without the sattva, without this. So the individual has to allow during his 70 to 100 years lifespan a time for dharma at all times, a short period of dharmic wealth, time for limited enjoyment. For example, when the grandchildren are born, you are supposed to be leaving the house and thinking of the forest. The forest meaning like the European monasteries, ashramas in the Indian forest land, that you have had your life, you have brought up children, the grandchildren have come, the future is safe. You can go and meditate about the cosmos and God and various other things, and that's a path to follow towards moksha. And if one has accumulated a lot of wealth, I think there are some fine contemporary examples. Bill Gates is a fine example. He has clearly realized that excessive wealth will spoil his children. He has provided enough for them and put the rest into the foundation. And Warren Buffett committed to giving $37 billion over the next 10 years. I would pray for a stock market recovery, not for the sake of anybody else, but for the sake of Warren Buffett, that his money may come back so that he may donate to all the good causes that he is doing. Even in karma, one needs to become a karma yogi. Another important concept which you would have heard about is nishkama karma. Perform action without a craving, without anxiety, without manipulating, lobbying for personal recognition and reward. That will come anyway. And the philosophy was scientifically very valid. Among the subjects I studied was operations research, industrial engineering. So if you take human energy, mental and physical, as 100%, if the person is not worried about recognition and reward, 100%, maybe 95% of that energy will go on the task. If the person is worried about recognition and reward, looking this shoulder and that shoulder, maybe 40% of energy will go on the task. It will get underperformed. There's a direct correlation, therefore the reward will come down. Therefore it is better to be a nishkama karmi, create wealth for organizations, for society, beyond a point, restrict one's needs. Another important principle, again figured in this morning's prayer. The prayer ended with 3 repetitions of the call for peace. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shanti 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 is the end of most Indian prayers, ceremonies, mantras, various kinds of rituals. It always ends with that. And there is a mantra we all know, a kind of a prayer. Mahamantra is a big prayer, and there's a particular prayer called Shanti Mahamantra, which is very profound. This was thousands of years ago. They composed this prayer, which prays not only for peace in me and my home, in me and my village. It doesn't pray for in me and my country. It doesn't pray just for peace among human beings. It prays for peace among human beings, animals, the forests, the medical plants, in space. Vanaspataya Shanti, Antariksha Shanti. Or the 2 words, for example, let us pick up. Let there be peace in forests. That means various kinds of tsunami, earthquake, cyclones, storms. Let them not destroy the greenery that you have created for us to live in this world. Let there not be meteors and collisions damaging. Let there be. So today when we talk about space warfare, Star Wars, the new kind of weapon systems, hopefully the new president of the US will pull back from some of these steps. So they recognize that the human being will go through an oscillation of joy and grief on both ends of the spectrum, but the only sustainable long-term mental state is peace. And you may temporarily deviate from that peace and take on a conflict, take on a difference, take on a challenge. And today even cancer patients are finding this useful, to come to terms with the fact that one has cancer, one has to go through the treatment, do it peacefully, cooperate with the medicine and the treatment, and get well sooner rather than later. Now H.G. Wells, in his world history, among the few rulers he picks up is a man called Ashoka, who on the same day that he won a battle, the battle of Kalinga, normally kings would delight, exult, hold a party, banquet, celebrate. Here he was regretting, remorseful, looking at the number of dead bodies on his side and the opponent's side, and he swore that evening on that battlefield that I will not engage in any more wars, no more conquests. And he spent his rest of life sending messengers of peace to Sri Lanka, to Burma, to Cambodia, Southeast Asia, right up to Japan, to Afghanistan. It's a pity that fundamentalism is back up again, and the Bamiyan Buddha was recently demolished. Hope it will be rebuilt. We have to go back to those fundamental truths, that peace is the only sustainable long-term human condition. The 4th core value is truth, Satyam, and Montessori refers to this in many of her talks. the message of the Indian Constitution and the motto that appears in the stationery of the President and Prime Minister of India is Satyam Eva Jayate. It is a quotation from the Upanishads. Satyam, truth, Eva, only, Jayate, wins. It's a very unequivocal statement. It is not a conditional statement. It is not one of the one-handed economist statements or a journalistic statement, maybe, perhaps. It doesn't say Satyam Api Jayate. It does not say Satyam also wins. It doesn't say Satyam Kadachit Jayate. Satyam sometimes wins. It says Satyam only wins in the long run. It is just a matter of time. And you may therefore find that truths which were buried by violence and power are dug out. They keep coming out. Sometimes it may take 200 years. Sometimes it may take 2000 years. But very often it is quicker. And how quickly truth comes out in a society, they said, means it depends on how much that society cherishes dharma. If the society cherishes dharma, somebody or the other will very quickly investigate, collectively bring out this untruth that is trying to be suppressed by somebody. So, truth is God. Gandhi's own autobiography, he gave it the title, My Experiments with Truth. All his life was a seeking of truth, and he sought truth to the point where he made some statements which appeared at that time to people like Nehru, who were very keen on creating a state. Nehru's ideal was there were two ideals for him, good in their own way, to create a democratic state with an electoral system, which is good, and second, to create an economy partly on the Russian model, partly West, a mixed economy with a public sector. Gandhi was not interested so much in those things, and he said that sanitation to me is more important than political independence. Right sanitation in the Indian villages, the prevention of communicable diseases, mass epidemics, and today we are still struggling with urban slums. In fact, one organization which has been recognized worldwide is not the Planning Commission or the Industry Ministry of the Government of India, but an organization called Sulabh Sauchalay. Public toilets run by people, community toilets cleanly run by people, where by paying a pence or two, you can use that facility. So his life was an experiment with truth, and Einstein made that statement that generations to come will wonder whether a man like Gandhi ever lived and walked on this earth. But his pursuit of truth has influenced many others. One of the things that gives me great ananda, and I hug every South African that I meet, is how Nelson Mandela followed Gandhi's philosophy and saved South Africa from a bitter, bloody racial war or mass migration, and established a multiracial democratic society. And their commission, whether it has done a perfect job or not, that's a separate issue. But the very idea of naming that commission, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, is an acknowledgement of the importance of truth. Now, globally, there is a push for truth, the right to information. That is the tool. We have a Right to Information Act in India, and there are many other democracies where there is, and these can uncover things that people like President Bush would like to hide. The final value that I'd like to share with you is this world as one family, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. This is a phrase that is very familiar to most Indian students and teachers and citizens. This was thousands of years ago. They recognized, they were aware of the ambitions of kings, emperors, wars, the sufferings of people. Montessori mentions this actually, that in history all wars have been the oppression of the vanquished and the expropriation of all that they had by the victors. Tremendous damage, and every time restart and another war will create more destruction. Therefore, the net progress of humanity has been held back by much of this violence. Therefore, we have to break these barriers. Peaceful coexistence is the only answer. And there, the philosophy makes a distinction between what kind of person is narrowly centered in his or her identity and what kind of person is more broadly oriented. Lagu Chetas, people with a very weak mind. Therefore, one of the purposes of education should be to make the mind stronger, not in terms of cruelty, but stronger to recognize and bear the injustices and weaknesses in the world and a conviction to do something about it. And to develop in the person, instead of a Lagu Chetas, a broad-minded, Vishala Charitam, broad-minded person who is not threatened by variety, diversity, difference in this world, in fact looks at it as an opportunity, as an enrichment, and even make up past differences and conflicts. And therefore it is very nice to see. I am myself an optimist. That's what has kept me going. With all of India's problems, we still see progress, and we are now beginning to see in the 21st century maybe an Asian, Indian, Chinese kind of century, but it should be a very responsible one, not a jingoistic century. So the coming together of the European Union, ASEAN, African Union, just last year the 36th country signed up. Therefore the African Union is now likely to become a reality. We should have a similar broader ASEAN Union here. Many challenges remain, but I think somewhere in this century a world government may emerge. Let me now move to applications. If you take these two sets of concepts of Montessori and the Universal Indian philosophical ones, which are highly corresponding to each other, we can see a lot of potential for application. I think coming out of feudalism, authoritarian structures in the family, in the school, in the organizations, and also in the bureaucracy, we need to assert this value of the basic dignity and respect for each and every individual, independent of race, religion, economic position, sex, and so on. So the UN Charter has this in its statement. More and more corporations now, under the Kofi Annan corporate charter scheme, are having corporate core values where they recognize the human dignity of their vendors, distributors, employees of the extended broader enterprise. And we need to bring this in schools. There are still schools where the board of trustees or governors are seen as a very dominant power, and not enough consultation and involvement of the teachers. We need to open up those kinds of systems, and all formal institutions and informal hierarchies need to recognize the Brahman in each individual, the individuality of each child as it grows into an adult. We also need to apply these two values of not only corporate social responsibility, CSR, which is now recognized in the annual reports of many companies. It is now a section mandatory by law, and companies also expand more. Some companies go beyond. Intel, 2007, has published a 100-page separate report called their Corporate Responsibility Report. And I'd just like to mention one simple example there. I think as an intent, it is a grand intent. Many may be cynical about industry and about corporates. That is understandable. But cynicism doesn't get us anywhere. I think the right language, the right concepts are a good start, and we should help and push that in the same direction. Intel has a new vision called sand to sand. I think at least as a concept, it's a very noble one. The chip, as you know, is silica, is made from sand. And they now want to take in their corporate budget responsibility that all discarded computers and devices which have this chip, the chip is disposed of without chemical and other fallouts, that it merges back into sand. That's awesome responsibility, even in paper, for a company to take and publicly profess. So similarly, individuals need to have personal social responsibility. We are not doing enough. None of us is doing enough. Even Gandhi was not satisfied. If he had not been shot, he wanted to live 125 years. That is the Vedic span of life. I think he could have. There is an interview that he gave to the American journalist Irving Fisher when he was 78, and Fisher writes that I was running and Gandhi was walking. The only time he could talk to me was during his morning walk. At 78, this man's walk was so bright, and he felt he had not done enough in his lifetime. Where are we? So there is a need for tremendous personal social responsibility, and there is so much that people can do. That's the aim of the organization Sampradhan that was mentioned in my introduction, and there are many others worldwide like that. Canada has a Canadian Institute of Philanthropy, and the campaign that they have had, some of you may be familiar. I hope there are some delegates from Canada. We looked at that carefully and picked up some lessons. Imagine campaign, the concept of local heroes who are doing things, who are recognized, appreciated in that process. The next area where we need to apply all these insights is in conflict prevention and the resolution of conflicts. There will always be differences, and today the conflict is becoming more dangerous. It is not an open battlefield. It is terrorism, suicide bombers, guerrilla warfare, the danger of now chemical, biological weapons coming in, an urban water supply system, if it is polluted, could cause horrendous damage. And violence also arises from petty issues. The rajas that I mentioned, in a country like Britain, where I lived for 5 years, very happily, people normally very stable. Road rage is a big issue now. People are getting into violence just because somebody is slowed down in a highway. So this is I think there are contradictory trends in the world. Obviously, it is a halahal. Indian philosophy recognizes that the world will always be churning. And the only question is that, are the forces of dharma stronger than the forces of evil? Which will win? You can never stop this churn because of the human propensity to experience and experiment with things. And I think what we have to make sure, conferences like this, individuals like this, and when I talk about personal social responsibility, anyone participating in a Montessori conference has an extra responsibility compared to someone who has not been here. And we need to think about what we can do, and there are many issues on which each one of us can help. That's why people are taking to yoga, meditation, looking at inner peace. A more sattvic and refined citizen will help resolve conflicts, prevent conflicts, and will not generate conflicts. Satyam is the next principle that we looked at. One truth, many paths. One of the statements in Indian philosophy is Ekam Satyam, Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti. Truth is one. Scholars, philosophers speak of it in different ways. Obviously, there are very many angles of looking at it, but every citizen has the opportunity, the right, the authority, and the responsibility to listen to various strands of truth and integrate them. We have to arrive at our truths which are consistent with Dharma. And today Dharma is not Indian Dharma or Italian Dharma or American Dharma. It has to be global Dharma, because we have got only one world in which to live. Montessori talked about, just like her medical background, she said there must be a science of peace. There is science of war. Von Clausewitz, strategies of war, but we need a strategy of peace, science of peace. And I think there are now scholars looking at the forces that will bring us peace. But I think as citizens, we must act ahead of the scholars, and they may then theorize on what we have done. And finally, world governance. I think we have to also bring about global governance. It should not be possible for any one power to act unilaterally anywhere in the world. Today it may be the US, tomorrow it may be China. Later on, I hope, God forbid, it is not India. We should prevent any nation or any grouping because of its economic power and military technology acting unilaterally. I think world governance is the only sustainable long-term solution for us.